The night had been planned for weeks, every detail carefully curated to mark a decade of our lives together. 10 years of marriage. It was supposed to be a celebration, a night where we could reminisce about how far we'd come, how we survived the early days of being broke, how we built a life, a family, and a home. I was filled with a mix of nostalgia and excitement as I pulled into our driveway, a bouquet of roses on the passenger seat, still fresh and fragrant. A small velvet box nestled in my pocket, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. Our favorite restaurant was booked. I had even arranged for the kids to stay over at their grandparents'. The whole night was meant to be just us, a rare occasion of peace and time together. I felt a rush of anticipation as I unlocked the door, the smell of her perfume lingering in the air. The house was dimly lit, candles scattered across the living room and dining area, giving off a warm, romantic glow. "Hey, babe," I called out, setting the roses down on the table. No response. I walked deeper into the house, expecting to find her upstairs getting ready or maybe in the kitchen putting the final touches on something. The silence seemed out of place, but I brushed it off as a result of my own eagerness. Tonight was going to be perfect. Then I noticed her phone on the couch, screen lit up with a notification. Out of habit, I glanced at it, a text message. The name on the screen wasn't one I recognized. My stomach tightened, but I told myself not to jump to conclusions. She probably just forgot to mention a new friend or coworker. But curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself unlocking her phone, a privilege she had given me long ago, back when trust was something we never had to question. The message read, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Meet me at 9. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was reading. There had to be some explanation, right? Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. I tried to shake off the creeping doubt, but something about the message, the casual intimacy, gnawed at me. I put her phone down and sat on the couch, a sinking feeling settling into my bones. Where was she? It was well past 7 p.m., and she hadn't mentioned any plans before our dinner. My mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Minutes passed like hours before I heard the sound of the front door. She walked in, smiling, looking stunning in a red dress that I hadn't seen before. For a second, I almost forgot what I had just read. I wanted to pretend everything was fine, but the knot in my stomach was too tight. Something was wrong, and I couldn't ignore it. "Hey, you're back early," she said, her voice light and cheerful. She leaned in to kiss me, but I pulled back slightly, studying her face. Her smile faltered for just a moment, but she quickly covered it with a laugh. "What's wrong?" I didn't know where to begin. My mouth felt dry, the words stuck in my throat. Should I confront her now? Or should I wait, gather more information? But the thought of waiting, of pretending for even one more minute, made my chest ache. "I saw a message on your phone," I finally said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. Her eyes widened, her face quickly shifting from confusion to something else, panic. She looked away for a split second, and that was all I needed to know. "What's going on?" I pressed, my voice growing firmer. "Who were you meeting tonight?" She hesitated, her mouth opening and closing as if she was trying to find the right words. But there were no right words for this, not anymore. The silence between us was heavy, suffocating. She started, but then stopped, her eyes pleading with me to drop it. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not now. Not after what I had just seen. The truth was already there, hanging in the air between us, undeniable. "You're cheating on me, aren't you?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't even a question anymore. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. The world I had built, the marriage I had fought so hard to maintain, crumbled in an instant. The night that was supposed to celebrate our love had become the night I discovered it was all a lie. I stood up, the roses on the table looking absurdly out of place in the new reality that had just unfolded. I felt numb, the shock overwhelming the anger and hurt that I knew would come later. "I think you should leave," I said, my voice cold, detached. I couldn't even look at her anymore. She didn't argue. She didn't try to explain or deny it. She just nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked upstairs to pack a bag. I stood there, staring at the door, the night that was supposed to be perfect now shattered beyond repair. As she left, the silence returned, only this time it wasn't filled with anticipation or warmth. It was filled with the cold, hard reality of betrayal. And I was alone. Chapter 2, The Aftermath. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the house felt impossibly empty. I stood in the dimly lit living room, staring at the flickering candles that had been meant to set the mood for an anniversary dinner. They were still burning, but now they seemed to mock me. The roses lay discarded on the table, their fragrance heavy and sweet, but nauseating in the wake of what had just happened. I didn't know how long I stood there, lost in thought. Minutes. Hours. Time had lost all meaning in that moment. The numbness was beginning to wear off, and in its place, a searing pain started to creep in. The reality of it hit me like a truck. She was gone. But worse, she had been gone long before tonight emotionally, at least. How long had she been lying? How long had she been seeing him behind my back? My mind raced with questions, each one twisting the knife deeper. I felt the weight of betrayal sitting heavy on my chest. A part of me wanted to smash something, anything, just to release the pent-up anger building inside of me. But another part of me, perhaps the part that was still in shock, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I sank into the couch, burying my head in my hands. We had built a life together. 10 years of marriage, 2 kids, a home, memories. All of it felt tainted now. Was any of it real? Or had I just been a fool, blind to what was happening right under my nose? I thought back to all the little signs I had ignored over the past year. The late nights at work. The sudden interest in going to the gym, in self-care. The way she had started to pull away, emotionally and physically. I had chalked it up to the usual wear and tear of a long marriage, telling myself that we were just going through a rough patch. But now, it was clear she had been slowly drifting away while I had been holding on, oblivious. Her phone was still on the couch, the screen now dark. Part of me wanted to pick it up again, to dig through her messages, to know everything. Who was he? How long had this been going on? Did she love him? But I couldn't bring myself to do it. The truth was already unbearable. I didn't need the details. I sat there for a while, trying to wrap my head around everything. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. I pulled it out, seeing a text from my brother. "Happy anniversary, man. Hope you two are having a great night. You deserve it." The words felt like a cruel joke. I stared at the screen, feeling a fresh wave of pain wash over me. I couldn't respond, not yet. How could I tell anyone what had just happened? How could I admit that my marriage, the one I had thought was strong enough to last a lifetime, was now over? I slipped my phone back into my pocket and stood up, walking aimlessly through the house. Every room felt different now, colder somehow. I wandered into the kitchen, opening the fridge out of habit, though I wasn't hungry. The champagne I had bought for the night stared back at me from the top shelf. I closed the fridge door without touching it, the sight of it too much to bear. As I walked into the hallway, I found myself stopping in front of the kids' room. Their laughter still echoed in my mind, their tiny voices full of innocence and joy. How was I going to tell them? How could I explain that their mother was leaving, that our family was broken? A lump formed in my throat, and for the first time that night, I felt tears burning behind my eyes. I had to be strong for them, but the weight of what was coming, the inevitable divorce, the custody arrangements, the questions felt overwhelming. I walked into their room, sitting down on the edge of one of their small beds. The room was filled with the comforting clutter of childhood stuffed animals, toys, little drawings taped to the walls. It was a stark contrast to the chaos swirling inside me. The silence pressed down on me, heavier now than it had been earlier. I thought about calling someone, my brother, my best friend, anyone who could listen. But the words wouldn't come. I wasn't ready to share this nightmare with the world. Not yet. For now, it was just me and the crushing reality that my life had just split in two. I stood up, walking back to the living room where the candles still flickered faintly. I blew them out one by one, each extinguished flame marking the end of something, a dream, a hope, a life I had thought was mine. The house plunged into darkness, mirroring the void I felt inside. Tomorrow, I'd have to figure out what to do. I'd have to talk to her, to figure out how we were going to tell the kids, how we were going to unravel the life we had tied together over the last 10 years. But tonight, there was nothing left to do but sit in the silence, alone. And wonder how it had all gone so wrong. Chapter 3, Facing the Truth. The morning light crept into the room, casting long shadows across the floor. I had barely slept. The few hours I did manage were restless, haunted by images of her with him, this stranger who had somehow inserted himself into our lives without me knowing. Each time I closed my eyes, my mind conjured up scenes of them together, laughing, sharing moments that used to belong to us. I groaned, rubbing my temples, feeling the weight of it all bearing down on me. The house was quiet, too quiet without her here, but I knew that peace was temporary. Soon, the reality of our shattered marriage would explode into the lives of everyone around us. Friends, family, our kids, they would all feel the ripple effect of her betrayal. I got out of bed, moving on autopilot as I made my way to the bathroom. The reflection staring back at me in the mirror looked older somehow, wearier. My eyes were bloodshot, dark circles forming beneath them. My jaw was tense, and I realized I had been grinding my teeth in my sleep. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the exhaustion and the raw emotions still swirling inside me. I knew I couldn't hide from this forever. She'd be back soon to talk, to figure things out, as she had said before she left. But what was there to figure out? She had been unfaithful, and that was something I couldn't look past. How could I ever trust her again? How could I stay with someone who had lied to me so completely? I went downstairs, my feet heavy on the hardwood floor. The roses were still on the table, wilted now. I grabbed them and tossed them in the trash without a second thought. Every reminder of last night made my stomach turn. I was about to make coffee when I heard a knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't ready to face her again, to listen to whatever excuses she might have, or worse, to hear her admit how much she cared about him. But I knew avoiding the conversation wouldn't change anything. I opened the door, and there she stood. She looked tired, too, like she hadn't slept any better than I had. Her eyes were puffy, red from crying, but I couldn't let myself feel sorry for her. Not now. Not after what she had done. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small, tentative. I stepped aside, letting her in, but I didn't offer any pleasantries. She walked into the living room, glancing around as if she were a stranger in her own home. I stayed by the door for a moment, trying to summon the strength to handle whatever was coming next. When I finally joined her, she was sitting on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked like she was holding herself together by a thread. "I know you don't want to hear anything I have to say right now," she began, her voice shaky, "but I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen." I bit back the surge of anger rising in my chest. "You didn't mean for this to happen? You've been cheating on me, I said, my voice harsher than I intended, but I couldn't soften it. Not now. She flinched at my words, but nodded. I know. I've made a huge mistake. She paused, her eyes filling with tears again. I've been feeling lost, disconnected. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. And then, he was there. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I swear, I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me. I repeated, incredulous. Then why didn't you just talk to me? Why did you go behind my back? You could have come to me, but instead, you chose to destroy everything we built together. She looked down at her hands, guilt written all over her face. I know. I was scared. I didn't know how to fix things with us, and I made the wrong choice. I know that now. Her words felt empty, like they were too little, too late. It didn't matter that she regretted it now. The damage was done. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice quieter now, more resigned than angry. Do you want to fix this? Do you even care about us anymore, or was that just something you told yourself while you were off with him? She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. She didn't have an answer. Or at least, not one she was willing to say out loud. I don't know, she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so confused. I never stopped loving you, but I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how we come back from this. I nodded, feeling the finality of her words settle over me. This wasn't something that could be patched up with apologies and promises. The foundation of our marriage had been cracked, maybe beyond repair. I think you need to figure out what you want, I said, standing up. Because I can't do this halfway. If we're going to try to move forward, I need to know that you're all in. Otherwise, there's no point. She stood up too, wiping at her eyes. I understand. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry. Yeah, I muttered, looking away. Me too. There wasn't much more to say after that. She gathered a few more things, leaving me with a promise to be in touch once she had time to think. As the door closed behind her again, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. Whatever happened next, it would be different. Chapter 4, Broken Pieces. Days passed like a blur, each one blending into the next. I went through the motions work, picking up the kids from school, dinner, but everything felt hollow, like I was living someone else's life. I hadn't spoken to her since that morning, though her absence hung in the air like a ghost. Our house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt like a stranger's home. The kids were too young to understand what was happening, and I dreaded the moment when we'd have to tell them. For now, I kept up the charade, pretending that everything was fine. But I knew that was temporary, and the weight of what was coming sat heavy on my chest. One night, I found myself sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at the empty space beside me. I couldn't help but think about the life we had shared in this room, our late-night talks, the moments of intimacy, the shared dreams. Now, it all felt like a distant memory, something that belonged to another time, another life. I picked up my phone, scrolling through our old photos, vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings with the kids. Each picture was a snapshot of a life that had seemed so solid, so real. But now, looking at them felt like looking at the ruins of something I could never rebuild. A text came in from my brother. Hey, man, you've been quiet. Is everything okay? I hadn't told him or anyone about the cheating. I wasn't ready to face the inevitable questions, the pity, the awkwardness that would come once people found out. But keeping it all bottled up was starting to weigh on me. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. Finally, I typed back. No, it's not. Can I come over tomorrow? The response was immediate. Of course. Anytime. You don't have to explain anything. Just come by. I sighed, feeling a small sense of relief. Maybe talking to someone would help. Maybe I needed to say the words out loud, to acknowledge what was happening in my life instead of trying to carry it all alone. The next morning, I dropped the kids off at school and drove over to my brother's place. It was a short drive, but it felt like it stretched on forever, each mile bringing me closer to a conversation I wasn't sure I was ready for. When I pulled into his driveway, he was already standing outside, waiting for me. "Hey," he said, giving me a small smile as I stepped out of the car. "I figured we could grab a drink and talk." I nodded, grateful for his straightforwardness. No questions, no pressure, just the space to say what I needed to say. We settled in his living room, a couple of beers in hand, and for a while, we just sat there in silence. It felt good to just be there, to not have to pretend for a moment. But eventually, he looked over at me, his expression serious. "What's going on, man?" he asked softly. "I've never seen you like this." I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words, but they felt heavy in my throat. Finally, I just said it. "She's been cheating on me." His eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, he was speechless. Then he set his beer down, leaning forward. "What? When? How long has this been going on?" "I don't know for sure," I replied, my voice tight. "I found out on our anniversary night. I saw a message on her phone, and when I confronted her, she admitted it." He ran a hand through his hair, letting out a low whistle. "Jesus. I'm so sorry, man. I don't even know what to say." "Yeah," I muttered, staring at the floor. "Me neither." We sat in silence again for a while, the weight of my words sinking in. I hadn't realized how much I needed to tell someone until now. Saying it out loud made it feel more real, more final. "What are you going to do?" he asked after a long pause. "I don't know," I admitted. I told her she needed to figure out what she wants. But honestly, I don't know if I can ever forgive her. "How do you come back from something like this?" he sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know, man. I wish I had the answer. But whatever happens, you don't have to do it alone. We're all here for you, okay?" His words were comforting, but they didn't make the decision any easier. I knew I had support, but in the end, this was something I had to face on my own. No one could make the choice for me. I stayed at my brother's for a few more hours, talking about everything, about the kids, about the life I thought we had, and about the deep sense of betrayal that was eating away at me. He listened, never offering easy answers or cliches, just being there. It was more than I could have asked for. By the time I left, I felt a little lighter. The weight of it all hadn't disappeared, but at least I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. As I drove home, I thought about what the future might look like. Divorce felt like the inevitable next step, but part of me still clung to the idea of salvaging something, if not for my sake, then for the kids. But could I ever truly forgive her? And even if I did, could I trust her again? When I pulled into the driveway, I saw her car parked outside. My heart skipped a beat. She hadn't told me she was coming over. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, to avoid the confrontation I knew was waiting inside. But I couldn't keep running from this. I opened the door and found her sitting on the couch, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were puffy, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I stood there, staring at her, the woman I had spent 10 years of my life with, the woman I had loved so deeply. But now, I wasn't sure who she was anymore. "Yeah," I replied, my voice hard. I guess we do. And as I sat down across from her, I knew that this conversation, whatever came out of it, would define the rest of our lives. Chapter 5, The Conversation. The room felt like it was holding its breath as we sat across from each other, the silence stretching between us like an impenetrable wall. She looked small, almost fragile, sitting there on the couch. Her eyes, swollen from crying, avoided mine as if she couldn't bear to meet them. My hands clenched into fists, a mix of anger and sadness twisting in my gut. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. But I couldn't help it. The hurt was too raw, too fresh. She swallowed hard, her hands gripping the fabric of the couch as if she was trying to anchor herself. I've been thinking a lot. About us. About everything. She paused, glancing up at me briefly before looking away again. I know I've hurt you in a way that I can't take back. I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough, but I need you to know how much I regret what I did. The words felt rehearsed, like something she had played out in her head over and over. But they still didn't change what had happened. Regret doesn't undo anything, I said flatly. It doesn't change the fact that you chose to cheat on me. You made that decision, not just once, but again and again. She flinched at my words but nodded. I know. I was lost, confused. I didn't know how to talk to you about how I was feeling, and instead of trying to fix things with you, I made the worst decision of my life. Lost. I scoffed. How were you lost? We had a life together, a family. If you were lost, why didn't you just talk to me? Why didn't you try to work on things with me instead of looking for someone else? Her voice cracked as she spoke. I don't have an excuse. I was selfish. I thought I was fixing something in myself, but all I did was destroy everything I cared about. I didn't mean to fall for him. I didn't mean for it to go this far. She wiped at her eyes, but the tears kept coming. I felt a sharp pang in my chest at the word fall. So, it wasn't just sex. There were feelings. You fell for him, I said slowly, letting the words sink in. You actually fell for him. She nodded, barely able to get the words out. I did, but it's over now. I ended it. I don't want him. I want you, us. I know that probably doesn't mean anything to you right now, but I ended it because I realized that I was destroying the one thing I didn't want to lose, our family. The irony of it hit me like a punch. She ended it, but only after I caught her. If I hadn't found out, would she still be with him? Would she have ever come clean on her own? The betrayal felt deeper than just the physical act. It was the deception, the months of lies, the emotional connection she had formed with someone else while I had been oblivious. I can't just forget this, I said, my voice low, strained. You betrayed me, and I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way. Her face crumpled, and she covered her mouth to stifle a sob. I know. I know, and I hate myself for it. I wish I could take it back. I wish I could erase everything that happened, but I can't. I can only tell you how sorry I am and how much I want to fix this. But I know that's not up to me anymore. It's up to you. I stood up, needing to put some space between us. I walked to the window, staring out at the street, at the normalcy of the world outside. I could hear her soft crying behind me, but I didn't turn around. What about the kids? I asked after a long pause, my voice quieter now. How are we going to tell them? She sniffled, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater. I've been thinking about that, too. I don't want them to know everything, at least not now. We can just tell them we're going through a hard time and that we're trying to figure things out. I don't want them to hate me. They don't have to hate you to be hurt by this, I said, still not turning around. No matter how we frame it, their world is going to change. They're going to lose the stability we promised them. And that's on you. She didn't respond for a long time, and I finally turned around to face her. She looked utterly defeated, like she had already resigned herself to the idea that I wouldn't forgive her. "I don't want a divorce," she said softly. "But I'll understand if that's what you want. I can't bear the thought of losing everything." I sat down again, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. Divorce had been on my mind constantly since the night I found out. It seemed like the only way to truly move on, to start fresh without the constant reminder of what she had done. But then there were the kids, our history, the life we had built together. Was it worth throwing all of that away? "Do you think we can actually fix this?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. "Because I don't know if I have it in me to try if I'm just going to be second-guessing everything for the rest of our lives." She took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I don't know. But I want to try. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, go to counseling, work through the pain, whatever you need from me. I want to be better for you, for the kids. But I understand if you don't think it's possible." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she had walked through that door. She wasn't the same person I had married, and maybe I wasn't the same person she had married either. Somewhere along the way, we had both lost pieces of ourselves, pieces that had led us here, to this breaking point. Could we find our way back? Could we rebuild what had been shattered? Or was it already too late? "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said quietly. "I don't know if I can forget this." She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I understand." We sat there in silence, the weight of everything hanging in the air between us. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. Whatever happened next, it was going to be a long, painful journey. And I wasn't sure either of us was strong enough to survive it. Chapter 6, A Decision in the Dark. The silence after our conversation was suffocating. For hours, I just sat there, staring at nothing, while she waited, hoping for some kind of response, some clarity that neither of us could find. Eventually, she got up, gathering her things to leave. It was clear we both needed space, time to process the enormity of what was happening. She stood by the door, lingering. "I'll stay with my sister for a few days," she said quietly. "You don't have to decide anything right now. Just, take your time." I nodded, unable to look at her. I heard the door click shut behind her, and the house fell into a heavy, oppressive silence. It was just me now, alone with the echoes of everything that had fallen apart. I didn't move for a long time. My mind replayed every detail of our relationship, how we met, the first time we kissed, our wedding day, the birth of our children. All of those memories now felt tainted, shadowed by the knowledge of what had been going on behind my back. Every moment we had shared suddenly felt like a lie. The nights were the worst. That was when the weight of her betrayal crushed me the most. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I would picture them together, laughing, touching, sharing intimate moments that should have belonged to us. It was like a poison, eating away at my insides. I didn't know how to move forward from here. I didn't know how to heal. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to walk away, to cut her out of my life and never look back. But then there were the kids. I couldn't just think about myself, about my pain. There was more at stake here than just my marriage. They were the only reason I hadn't already packed my bags and filed for divorce. A few days after she left, I decided to visit a therapist. It wasn't something I had ever considered before. I had always been the type to handle things on my own, but this was too big. I couldn't untangle the mess in my mind. I needed help. The therapist's office was small but cozy, with soft lighting and shelves full of books and plants. It felt safe, at least as safe as a place like that could feel when you were about to bare your soul. I'm not sure where to start, I said after sitting down, feeling awkward under the therapist's steady gaze. Start wherever feels right for you, she said gently. I sighed, rubbing my hands together nervously. My wife, she cheated on me. I found out a few nights ago, on our anniversary. The words still felt foreign on my tongue, like I was telling someone else's story. But the therapist didn't react, just nodded, waiting for me to continue. We've been together for 10 years. I thought we were happy. I thought we were solid. But I was wrong. She's been seeing someone else for months. My voice cracked slightly, the enormity of it all crashing over me again. That's an incredibly painful thing to go through, she said softly. I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. I nodded, swallowing hard. I don't know what to do. I can't forgive her, but I don't want to just throw everything away. We have kids. And part of me still loves her. But I don't know if that's enough. She leaned forward slightly, her expression compassionate. It's completely understandable to feel torn. Betrayal, especially in a long-term relationship, can shake everything you believe to be true. It's okay to feel conflicted about what you want moving forward. Healing from something like this takes time, whether you choose to stay together or not. That's the thing, I said, my voice quieter now. I don't know if I can ever trust her again. Even if we try to fix things, I'll always wonder. I'll always be second-guessing everything. How do you rebuild trust after something like this? Rebuilding trust is one of the hardest parts of healing from infidelity, she said. It requires a lot of openness, vulnerability, and time. If both partners are committed to the process, it's possible, but it's not easy. Have you talked to her about how you're feeling? Does she understand the depth of the damage this has caused? I nodded. Yeah, we talked. She says she's sorry. She says she ended things with him. She says she wants to fix this. But I don't know if I can believe her. Part of me wonders if she's only saying that because I caught her. Would she have ended it on her own if I hadn't found out? That's a valid question, she acknowledged. Infidelity often raises a lot of doubts and uncertainties. It's important to give yourself permission to feel those doubts. You don't have to have all the answers right now. I leaned back in the chair, feeling exhausted by the weight of it all. I'm just so angry. And hurt. And confused. I don't know how to move forward. Every option feels like it's going to tear my life apart. Allow yourself to feel that anger and pain, she said gently. It's a normal response to what you're going through. You don't have to rush to a decision. It's okay to take your time and figure out what's best for you and your family. If you decide to stay, you'll need to work through that anger together. And if you decide to leave, there's no shame in that either. You're allowed to make the choice that's right for you. I left the session feeling slightly more grounded, though the pain was still there, gnawing at me. At least now I had someone to talk to, someone who could help me navigate the storm of emotions swirling inside me. But the decision still loomed over me like a dark cloud. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at the framed photos of our family on the wall. I thought about the kids, how their lives would be changed no matter what I chose. Staying meant trying to rebuild a broken trust, a task that seemed nearly impossible. Leaving meant breaking up our family, something I had promised myself I would never do. I picked up my phone, staring at her name in my contacts, my thumb hovering over the call button. She had texted a few times, asking how I was, telling me she was ready to talk whenever I was. I hadn't replied. I couldn't, not yet. But I couldn't keep hiding forever. Whatever decision I made, it was time to face it. With a deep breath, I pressed the button and held the phone to my ear, my heart pounding in my chest. Hey, her voice came through softly. Can we talk? Yeah, I said quietly. We need to talk. And in that moment, I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. Chapter 7, Facing the Fallout. The drive to her sister's place was quiet, the soft hum of the car's engine the only sound breaking the stillness. My mind was racing, yet I felt strangely calm, almost numb. Maybe it was the exhaustion, emotional, mental, physical, finally catching up with me. I had spent so much time agonizing over what to do, but now, it was time to face her, to face the reality of what had happened and what was to come. When I arrived, I sat in the car for a few moments, gathering myself. I hadn't seen her since that day she left, and part of me didn't know what to expect. Would she look different to me? Would I feel different? There was no telling how I'd react once we were face to face again, and that uncertainty gnawed at me. I finally stepped out of the car and walked to the door. Before I could knock, it swung open, and there she stood. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Her eyes were red, as if she hadn't slept in days, and there was a vulnerability in her expression I hadn't seen in a long time. The confident woman I had fallen in love with was gone, replaced by someone who seemed just as broken as I was. "Hey," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. I nodded and walked inside, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Her sister wasn't there, giving us the space we needed. We sat down in the small living room, the tension thick in the air. I didn't know how to start, and apparently, neither did she. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "I don't know where to begin. I've been thinking about this every minute of every day, and I still don't have the right words. But I want to try. I need to." I crossed my arms, leaning back slightly, still guarded. "Then try." She swallowed, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I betrayed you. And I hate myself for it. I keep thinking about how I let us get to this point, how I let myself make those choices. But the truth is, I wasn't thinking about us. I was only thinking about myself. I let my emotions get the best of me, and I destroyed the one thing I never wanted to lose." The words hung in the air between us, but they didn't bring the relief she probably hoped they would. They felt rehearsed, like she had been preparing for this moment, but they weren't enough. How could they be? I shook my head slowly. "You say you weren't thinking about us, but we've been married for 10 years. How could you not think about us? About the kids? You didn't just make one mistake, you made a series of decisions, over and over, that led us here." Her face crumpled, the guilt and shame evident in her eyes. "I know. I don't have an excuse. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or maybe ever. But I need you to know how much I regret everything." The room was heavy with emotion, and for a long time, we just sat in silence, both of us unsure of where to go from here. I was tired of the apologies. I didn't need more regret or guilt from her. I needed to know if there was even anything left to save. "I've been seeing a therapist," I said, surprising myself. It was the first time I had mentioned it. Trying to figure out what to do next. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, she looked hopeful. And I'm still not sure," I admitted. "Part of me wants to stay. For the kids. For us. But another part of me. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And I don't know how to live with that doubt." She nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I understand. I'm willing to do anything to prove to you that I'm committed to fixing this. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. But I know that's not enough. I can't ask you to trust me again just because I'm sorry. I don't know if I want to go through the process of fixing this," I said quietly, surprising myself with the bluntness. "It's not just about forgiving you. It's about whether I can live with what you did. Whether I can look at you the same way, or if every time I see you, I'll just be reminded of this. Her breath hitched, and she blinked back tears. I'm scared too, she admitted. I don't want to lose you. But I also know that I might have already. And that's my fault. We sat there for what felt like hours, both of us trapped in our own pain, our own uncertainty. It was clear that there were no easy answers, no quick fixes. Whatever we decided, it would be hard. But we couldn't keep sitting in this limbo forever. I'm willing to try counseling, I said finally, the words feeling like a tentative step forward. Not for you. For me. I need to figure out if this is something I can move past. Her eyes filled with hope, though she didn't smile. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. I looked at her, searching for something, some sign that this was the right path, that we could actually rebuild from the ashes of what we used to be. But all I saw was a broken woman, just as lost as I was. We're going to have to take this one step at a time, I said. I don't know where we're going to end up, but we owe it to ourselves and to the kids to try. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. I know. And I'm ready. For the first time in days, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was something. A willingness to see if we could find our way through the wreckage, even if I wasn't sure we would. I stood up, and she followed, her eyes watching me carefully. I'll call a counselor tomorrow, she said quietly. I nodded. Good. As I walked out the door, the weight of the conversation still lingered. I didn't know if we could ever fully repair what was broken between us. But for now, I was willing to take the first step. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to start healing. Chapter 8, Stepping into Counseling. The first counseling session was a lot harder than I expected. We had agreed to meet with a marriage counselor a few days after our last conversation, and though I knew this was a necessary step, part of me still wasn't sure if it would help. I had so many doubts about whether it was even possible to rebuild the foundation of trust that had been shattered. The counseling office was neutral, designed to make people feel at ease, but walking in felt anything but easy. It felt heavy. Like we were walking into the heart of everything we had tried to avoid for months. We sat down on the couch, barely looking at each other, and waited for the counselor to begin. The counselor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, introduced herself. I'm glad you both decided to take this step. I know this isn't easy, but it's a sign that both of you want to figure things out, whether that's together or apart. I nodded, my stomach twisted in knots. I could feel the tension radiating off my wife, sitting beside me but feeling miles away. She had barely spoken on the car ride over, and now that we were here, the silence between us seemed louder than ever. So, let's start by talking about why you're here, the counselor said, looking between us. What happened, and what are you hoping to achieve by coming to counseling? I took a deep breath, knowing I needed to be the one to say it. She cheated, I said, my voice flat. I found out a couple of weeks ago, and everything fell apart after that. I don't know if we can fix it, or if I even want to try. But I figured we should at least see if it's possible. The counselor nodded, her expression empathetic. Infidelity is one of the most painful betrayals a relationship can go through. It's completely normal to feel uncertain about what comes next. Have you both had a chance to discuss what led up to this? How long it had been going on? My wife shifted uncomfortably beside me, her hands clenched in her lap. We've talked about it a little, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it's been hard to have a real conversation without it turning into a fight. I scoffed before I could stop myself. Yeah, because it's not exactly an easy conversation to have. You've been lying to me for months, and now you expect me to just sit here and talk calmly about it? The counselor held up her hand gently, intervening before things could escalate. Let's take a step back. This is a space for both of you to express your feelings, but we want to make sure we're doing it in a way that allows for healing. It's okay to be angry, but let's try to keep the focus on understanding. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. She was right. If we were going to get anywhere, I had to control my anger, even though it felt like it was boiling just beneath the surface. I'm angry, I said finally, leaning back in my chair. I'm angry that she didn't come to me when things were wrong. That instead of working on our problems, she went to someone else. And now, I feel like I can't trust anything she says. I don't even know if I can trust what she's telling me right now. The counselor nodded, turning to my wife. How does that make you feel, hearing that? She wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling. It makes me feel ashamed. Because he's right. I did that. I chose to lie, and I broke his trust. And now I don't know how to earn it back, or if I even can. But I want to try. I need him to know that. I looked over at her, feeling a pang of something, maybe empathy, maybe guilt, but it wasn't enough to drown out the pain. You didn't care about earning my trust when you were with him, I said quietly. So why now? Why does it matter now that you've been caught? Her tears flowed freely now, and she shook her head. Because I was lost. I didn't think about the consequences, and I was selfish. I convinced myself that what I was doing didn't affect us, but I was lying to myself just as much as I was lying to you. When you found out, I realized what I was doing to our family. That's why I ended it. I know it doesn't change what happened, but I need you to believe that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. The counselor jumped in before I could respond. Rebuilding trust is one of the most difficult parts of this process. It's not something that happens quickly, and it's not something that can be forced. But if both of you are willing, we can take it step by step. I nodded, though I still felt unsure. What does that even look like? I asked. How do we start rebuilding trust when I don't even know if I want to be in this marriage anymore? The counselor leaned forward slightly. That's a very important question. Rebuilding trust starts with small actions. Open communication, transparency, and accountability. But it also requires you to take care of yourself, to be honest about your needs. It's not just about what she can do to fix this, it's also about what you need to heal, whether that's in this marriage or not. I appreciated the way she framed it. It wasn't all about trying to salvage the relationship at all costs. It was about figuring out what I needed to move forward, whether that meant staying or leaving. We'll take it one day at a time, the counselor continued. Today, we're just starting the conversation. But over time, if you choose to stay, we'll work on ways to rebuild trust through honesty and emotional openness. And if you choose to leave, we'll work on how to do that in a way that is healthy for both of you and your children. We finished the session feeling raw but slightly more grounded. The pain was still there, as sharp as ever, but there was at least a plan in place, a way forward, no matter what that path might be. In the car on the way home, we didn't talk much. The quiet between us was heavy, but it didn't feel as unbearable as before. She glanced at me a few times, as if she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. I wasn't ready to have a deep conversation just yet, but I wasn't shutting her out completely either. When we pulled into the driveway, I finally broke the silence. We'll see how this goes, I said, my voice steady. But I can't promise anything. I understand, she said softly. Thank you for giving this a chance. I nodded, stepping out of the car and heading toward the house. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was a glimmer of something in the distance. It wasn't hope, not yet. But it was the possibility of hope. And for now, that was enough.